What would you do if you discovered that your father took a military secret to the grave, a secret that could cost you your life? That's the question Paul Whitmore, a 32-year-old English engineer, was never supposed to try to answer. In 2019, he sold everything he owned, bought a sailboat, and set off on a journey that began as a nautical adventure and ended as one of the most disturbing discoveries in modern maritime history. But before we get to that unsettling discovery, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to understand who Paul was and why his story became one of the most intriguing and haunting in the modern nautical world. Paul Whitmore wasn't an ordinary sailor. At 32, this Manchester-born Englishman had built a solid career as a naval engineer, but his heart had always belonged to the sea. His neighbors described him as a meticulous man, almost obsessive when it came to navigation. Every detail of his journey was planned with surgical precision. But what truly drove Paul? What made a man abandon a promising career, sell all his belongings, and invest everything in a 12-meter sailboat named Serenity? His ex-wife, Margaret, offers a troubling clue. Paul changed after his father's death. He became distant. He kept talking about finding something at sea. I never knew what it was. The answer to that question may be connected to something discovered years later among his belongings. A nautical journal revealing obsessions far deeper than anyone could have imagined. In March 2019, Paul began preparing for what would be his final adventure. He sold his house in Manchester for $280,000 and invested every penny into the Serenity and the necessary equipment for a transatlantic voyage. But there was something unusual about his preparations. John Peterson, owner of the marina where Paul kept his boat, recalls peculiar details. Paul was stocking supplies for at least 8 months at sea. I asked if that wasn't excessive for the route he'd planned, but he just smiled and said, "You never know what you might find out there." Stranger still, Paul had modified the Serenity in unconventional ways. He installed a state-of-the-art satellite communication system, but also underwater excavation equipment. Why would a solo sailor need such gear? The answer may lie in the journal we found in the cave 5 years later. On April 15, 2019, Paul Whitmore departed from Southampton Harbor on a sunny morning. His last recorded words were to the maritime traffic controller, "Serenity departing for open waters. Next scheduled contact in 72 hours. But that contact never came. In the first weeks, maritime authorities weren't alarmed. Paul had informed them he'd be following a non-standard route through the Atlantic Islands, avoiding main commercial routes. His experience and the modern equipment aboard the Serenity suggested he was fully in control of the situation. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 weeks later, when a cargo ship reported sighting a drifting sailboat approximately 200 nautical miles southeast of the Canary Islands. The description matched the Serenity, but when a rescue vessel reached the location, there was nothing but open sea. Could this have been the first clue that Paul wasn't just sailing, but searching for something specific in that region? The ensuing search and rescue operation was one of the largest in the area in recent decades. Helicopters, Coast Guard ships, and volunteer vessels combed over 50,000 square nautical miles of the Atlantic over 2 months. Captain Rodriguez, who coordinated the operation, admits there was something unsettling about the case. Normally in shipwrecks, we find debris, life rafts, or at least oil slicks. With the Serenity, it was as if the boat and Paul had simply vanished. But there were clues authorities couldn't decipher at the time. Local fishermen from the Canary Islands reported strange sightings in the weeks following Paul's disappearance. Bright lights on the horizon at night, dark shapes moving beneath the water's surface. Reports dismissed as local folklore. Today, 5 years later, those reports take on a completely different dimension. For 5 long years, Paul Whitmore's case remained closed. Officially, he was declared dead in 2021, the victim of a nautical accident. His ex-wife, Margaret, received the life insurance payout, and tried to move on. The nautical community gradually forgot about the engineer who had vanished chasing a dream. But Margaret could never fully forget. "I had nightmares," she confesses. "I dreamed of Paul calling to me from somewhere far away as if he was trapped and couldn't get back." Those nightmares would become prophetically relevant when, in March 2024, a chance discovery changed everything we thought we knew about Paul Whitmore's fate. Dr. Sarah Chen, a marine biologist from Cardiff University, was conducting biodiversity research on the smaller islands of the Canary Archipelago when she made the discovery that would reopen the Paul Whitmore case. Her team was documenting the fauna of a partially flooded underwater cave on Alegranza Island when they found something that shouldn't have been there. "At first, we thought they were animal bones," Dr. Chen recalls. "But as we began carefully excavating, we realized they were human remains. And then we found this." This was a partially corroded but still legible nautical ID plate. P. Whitmore, Serenity, Southampton. How had Paul's remains ended up in a cave on an island over 100 kilometers off his planned route? And why were they buried, as if someone had deliberately concealed the body? The discovery of human remains was just the beginning. A week later, local fishermen, now alert to anything unusual, found wreckage from a sailboat in the shallow waters near Alegranza Island. The scattered wood and metal pieces, spread over an area of approximately 500 meters, were identified as belonging to the Serenity. But there was something deeply disturbing about the condition of the wreckage. Detective Inspector James Mitchell, a maritime investigation specialist, was called to examine the remains. "In 20 years investigating nautical accidents, I've never seen anything like it. The boat wasn't destroyed by a storm or collision. The marks on the wood suggest it was deliberately dismantled." Even more puzzling, the navigation and communication equipment had been removed with surgical precision. Who would do that, and why? Among the wreckage, investigators found something that would completely change our understanding of the case: Paul's nautical journal, protected in a waterproof container, hidden in a cavity within the hull. The final entries in the journal, dated May 2019, reveal a story far more complex than a simple nautical accident. Paul wasn't just sailing. He was searching for something specific, something his father had mentioned in his final days. "Day 32 at sea. I finally found the location my father described. The coordinates were correct. I can see the submerged rock formation he drew. Tomorrow, I will investigate the cave." What cave was this? What had Paul's father kept hidden from him his entire life? And why did that information cost Paul his life? The investigation into the Whitmore family's past revealed surprising connections to the region's maritime history. Paul's father, Robert Whitmore, had served in the Royal Navy during World War II and had been involved in classified missions in the North Atlantic. Declassified documents revealed that Robert had been part of a special unit tasked with recovering cargo from sunken German ships. More specifically, he had participated in the recovery of a U-boat that was transporting something described in the files only as materials of strategic value. Margaret now recalls fragmented conversations between Paul and his father in Robert's final months. They talked about completing the mission and honoring fallen comrades. "I thought it was just war nostalgia, but now, in light of the discovery in the cave, those conversations take on a completely different meaning. Paul wasn't just sailing. He was trying to finish something his father had started decades earlier. Forensic analysis of Paul's remains revealed disturbing details about his final days. While the cause of death was determined to be drowning, there was evidence that Paul had spent considerable time inside the cave before he died. Fragments of soil under his fingernails, specific wear on his teeth and bones, suggested he had been digging or excavating something. But what most caught investigators' attention was the position of his remains. Paul hadn't simply been buried. He had been carefully placed in a specific position, with his arms crossed over his chest and surrounded by stones arranged in a geometric pattern. Dr. Martinez, a forensic archaeologist, offers a shocking interpretation. This isn't a casual burial. Someone followed a specific protocol, almost as if they were honoring Paul or protecting something. Protecting what? And who else knew about Paul's presence on the island? The investigation turned to the local inhabitants of the region. While the smaller islands are sparsely populated, there are always fishermen, park rangers, and occasional tourists who might have seen something relevant. That's when Miguel Santos, a 67-year-old fisherman, finally decided to speak. For 5 years, he had kept a secret that haunted him every night. "I saw his boat. I saw the Englishman, but he wasn't alone." Santos describes having observed from a distance Paul working at the cave for several days in May 2019. But there were other people on the island, at least 2 men who seemed to be supervising Paul's work. They didn't look friendly, Santos recalls. And when the Englishmen stopped showing up, they stayed a few more days, as if they were cleaning something up. Who were those men? How did they know Paul would be on the island? And what really happened in the final hours of Paul Whitmore's life? The investigation uncovered a complex network of interests surrounding what Paul had been searching for. Documents recovered from Robert Whitmore's office indicated that he had maintained correspondence with German war veterans in the decades following the war. Correspondence that intensified drastically in the months before his death. Even more revealing, Paul's bank accounts showed significant transfers to organizations claiming to be German historical societies. Transfers that began immediately after his father's death and continued until his departure on his final voyage. Inspector Mitchell connects the dots. Paul wasn't just looking for treasure, he was paying for information. Someone was selling him details about the exact location of what his father had discovered during the war. But that transaction apparently cost more than money. It cost Paul his life. Piecing together the evidence, a clearer picture of Paul Whitmore's final days emerges. He arrived at Alegranza Island in May 2019, following precise coordinates provided by his German contacts. For 3 days, he worked methodically in the cave, using the excavation equipment he had brought. What he found remains a mystery, but the evidence suggests it was significant. Significant enough that others wanted to make sure Paul could never reveal his discovery. The supervisors, Miguel Santos observed, were likely representatives of the groups that had sold the information to Paul. Groups that had a vested interest in ensuring certain secrets from World War II remained buried. On the night of May 23, 2019, something went wrong. Paul may have tried to renegotiate the deal, or perhaps he threatened to reveal what he had found. What exactly happened remains speculation. But the result was fatal. The discovery of Paul Whitmore's remains reopened not just his case, but also broader questions about unresolved secrets from World War II. His obsession with completing his father's mission cost him his life, but also revealed the existence of international networks dedicated to keeping certain aspects of history hidden. Margaret, now finally knowing what happened to her ex-husband, offers a somber reflection. Paul was always obsessed with finishing what he started. He couldn't accept that some secrets are too dangerous to be revealed. The cave where Paul was found remains sealed by order of the authorities. Officially for safety reasons, but those close to the investigation know there's more to the story. 5 years after Paul Whitmore's disappearance, and a few months after the discovery of his remains, many questions remain unanswered. What exactly did he find in the cave? Who were the men Miguel Santos observed? And why did seemingly respectable organizations invest so much in keeping Paul silent? Detective Inspector Mitchell, who has spent the last few months investigating the case, admits we will probably never know the whole truth. There are forces at play here that are bigger than a simple missing person case. Paul got involved in something that connects World War II with powerful present-day interests. The only certainty is that Paul Whitmore died chasing something his father had discovered decades before, something valuable enough to kill for, something that remains buried in the cave on Allegranza, guarding its secrets for a few more years. The sea, they say, keeps its secrets. But sometimes, when we least expect it, the waves return fragments of truths to the shore, truths some would rather keep buried. Paul Whitmore's story is one of those fragments, a window into a world where official history is just the surface of much deeper and more dangerous truths. The cave on Allegranza remains sealed. But for how long? And how many other stories like Paul's are waiting to be discovered in the depths of the ocean? Today, when I look toward the horizon, I don't see just water. I see infinite possibilities, hidden secrets, and men like Paul Whitmore, who sacrificed everything in pursuit of truths the world may not be ready to face. The Serenity may have been destroyed, but Paul's search for answers echoes through time, reminding us that some obsessions are too powerful to be contained, even by death. And on quiet nights, when the wind blows in from the sea, local fishermen swear they can still hear the sound of a boat engine approaching the shores of Allegranza, carrying secrets that time is not yet ready to reveal. The story of Paul Whitmore ends here, but the mystery he uncovered remains, waiting for the next brave or reckless adventurer willing to challenge the forces that chose to keep the truth buried in the depths of the Atlantic Ocean.